Piccerilla, piccerilla, teneva una faccella che pareva un bignè ed era tutta bella, 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 bella. Due occhi che parlavano e ridevano e cantavano, che mentre mi guardavano lucevano, abbruciavano. E s'appicciai sto cuore, ma sto fuoco non può passa, e manca che pompiere che sto cuore si sto darà. Di che m'ha fatto di che m'ha fatto una buchella piccerella, una silla piccerilla, una silla, una buchella piccerella, piccerella.
Today is Marie Antoinette in a little show called Madame Guillotine.
So, hello everybody, welcome to Whining On. My name is Matthew Bowden, the Incorrigible Rogue, and today we are very lucky to have with us the lovely Kate Mior. Kate, how you doing?
Hello. Oh my God! So the demo reel you showed of Madame Guillotine was actually like the very first video I made like years ago.
Wow, well, it's nice to get that at the beginning. You can talk about how much greater it became after that.
I was gonna say, wow, I recognize how small that guillotine was, and oh my gosh, that was the first show I ever did. Oh Jesus Christ!
It's so strange looking back, isn't it? Seeing the videos of ourselves in our pupae developmental stages.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, like especially given what's going on with this pandemic, like seeing how far you've come, and it almost feels like a complete lifetime ago.
Well, I know the feeling, and you've had a very similar journey. Going into lockdown has not been the lack of activity.
Yeah, we had the longest lockdown in North America, 110 days.
I don't know how long ours has been. We're in quite a while now. We're supposed to be opening back up at the end of this month. But
Yeah.
let's leave the tragedy for a different interview, and let's get going. Just one quick thing to say to everyone who's watching that. Hey, everybody. If you don't know yet, if you're on Facebook, please join Whining On with Public Performers. Join the Incorrigible Rogue fan page, which is Facebook, The Public Performance. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe, click the bell. If you'd like to comment on the interview, like the interview, ask some questions. I will endeavour to ask those questions to Kate through the interview. And last of all, if you can and you're able to, please visit the Patreon, think about supporting the project. Now we've got all that stuff out of the way. Kate, you've had a quite creative life. You've got your finger in many different industries at the same time. Did you have a creative upbringing? Were your parents kind of pushing you towards being a creative when as a young person?
It's interesting. My parents were very encouraging when I was really young, and then circumstances happened that kind of shifted my, youth dramatically. So they were conceptually very interested in, me being creative. They were conceptually supportive of it. But then when it actually became like, my job, or they realized, oh shit, this person wants to actually like pursue this kind of lifestyle, that's when they kind of but it's a challenging one, because by that point, by the time I was at the age of entering university, they had kind of just stopped caring about raising children. So I mean, they vaguely know what I do for a living.
But they did nourish you in terms of creativity as a young person. Was this through theatre or through art, or?
Yeah, they when I was younger, they definitely fostered it. My dad was always like exceptional Renaissance person, incredible visual artist, an incredible musician, but he was an engineer. And so when, he was very compartmentalized. So art was, stuff he did for fun and not something he did for a job. And growing up in an immigrant family where most of your family overseas doesn't have an education, they were very much more keen on making sure we were stable. But by the time we were at the age where they were supposed to be the most stable, they weren't. And so that was kind of an interesting experience, to say the least.
So were you thinking about following your father or in your family's footsteps in terms of their interests by going, because you did an art degree, am I right in thinking that?
It wasn't a choice, it was kind of necessity. I don't really feel comfortable divulging the entirety of the situation, but I had a rough teenage years and left home. And when I left home, I kind of needed to earn a living very quickly. And it became very apparent that I was unemployable and couldn't work for other people. So I started street performing when I was like 19, 20. And I was doing that while I was in university, and pretty much paid for university and my education by street performing.
So what was your first day out street performing? And I suppose you guys before that, did you have an idea of what street performance was before you started street performing?
Not really. And I know a few people have, tried to say, well, that's bullshit. You must have seen Silver Elvis in Toronto. But I grew up in Rexdale, which is it's kind of like Toronto is a very big city. And even when I was growing up, Rexdale wasn't considered part of Toronto. It was kind of its own city. And it was mostly, immigrant families, very racialized, very poor, kind of part of Toronto. So my whole existence kind of was Rexdale. And I was friends with a photographer that I met going to goth clubs, who was an awesome photographer, really fascinating guy. And so quite often, because I had such cool goth clothing, he would kind of use me as his test subject for working out new camera equipment. So one day we went down to High Park, and he wanted to do some like still living, portraits of me. And I gathered a crowd randomly. And then people were like tipping me. And I was like, this is kind of cool. And then we kind of talked about, the concept of what a living statue was. And I was like, well, I could do this. This is kind of cool. I like people and entertaining. And so from that weird photography experience, I literally grabbed a milk crate that I had collected for records, and literally grabbed a milk. I was a crate slug, and covered it, in fabric. And then the next weekend, I went out downtown. I took the subway and took the bus. It was an ordeal at the time, and it still kind of is, because our city doesn't actually care about these, racialized suburbs. And so it took me about like 2 hours to get downtown, and found a public toilet, did all my makeup, found an arch that had a really nice kind of stone structure to it, and started living statuing, and did pretty okay for a first day out, and said, this fucking rocks. And then went back the next weekend.
And what did you do in terms of costuming? Because you were working in art at that time. So were you imagining what costumes you could do and how you could develop it, how you could create your own thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, like, costuming and character kind of always go hand in hand for me. I tend to lead with, you know, a strong sense of what's my character. So what is my character going to look like, and how can I quickly, easily establish what this character is going to be? So my first two characters were actually an angel, which I made the costume from some cool pieces that I found from local designers in Toronto and thrifting and that kind of stuff. And then the second one was my Marie Antoinette, which was actually my prom dress.
And so you can we don't have a prom here, so it's an issue. Do you keep your prom dress? Is that something that happens? It's kind of something you cherish?
It was custom made by a local designer. I got it done because how I got the money for it was really funny. I went to a school where there was a bunch of rich kids, and we used to play poker at lunch, and I kind of made the money from poker games to pay for that dress. And because I've always been very, very into supporting local makers and local designers. I walked by her window one day on Queen Street when I was, you know, going to a goth club or something, and I saw this amazing 18th century dress in the window, and I was like, oh my God, that's what I want for my prom. Went in, was like, how much does that cost? She was like, you know, you're a kid, it's probably too expensive for you, but I could probably make something for you. You know, what's within your budget? And she was very kind, did that. And so as a result, there was like meaning attached to it. Like, I don't buy shit disposably. I'm not, you know, I'm a bit sentimental about any purchases I make. Everything I have has value to it. I don't believe in disposable anything. So when I kept that dress, it was literally like my brain was, you're gonna make a fucking return off this because you spent money on this, so you're gonna make a return off this.
And what a wonderful thing to be able to do, to take something that you bought to have a good time and because you loved it, and then it's actually evolved into being an element of your career for some of your lifetime.
Well, I didn't even really care about proms or shit like that. It was more social pressure to do that. So when I went, I thought I would take the piss out of everybody and dress like Marie Antoinette. You know, the whole concept of it is kind of ridiculous. And for those of the folks who are in the audience who'd like probably, you know, don't know what a prom is, it's a North America thing where, you know, when you're finished high school, it's your big high school dance. And like, I never gave a shit about that stuff. I wasn't particularly popular. I didn't, you know, I was a nerd who hung out in the library during lunch. So it was more of the, well, everybody's socially pressuring me to do this, so if I'm going to do it, I'm going to fucking make fun of them the whole time.
Fair enough. Why not buck the trend while you're doing it? So at the time when you're going to do your street shows and you're first starting to do the statue work, are you seeing yourself as having a future in the arts, in the visual arts? You did a fine art degree, if I'm correct in thinking.
Pardon me? Sorry, I we're having issues with the audio.
Yeah.
So
you did a fine art degree, if I'm correct in thinking that.
No, I did film and animation.
Okay, so when you're doing the statue work, are you seeing yourself as having a career at this point in film and animation, and the statue work is just kind of feeding into that and helping support you while you're doing that?
At the time, I definitely for many years struggled with street performing being a career, because again, that was a really terrible period of my life that I don't necessarily want to get into too much detail about. But I loved street performing. I saw it potentially being a career for me, but I was receiving so much backlash against it. I was receiving a lot of stigma for it, because at the time when I started street performing like 18 years ago, you know, we weren't cool rock stars, you know, and most of the people I shared pitches with were people with substance issues, you know, addiction issues, people who, you know, felt like that. And when I started, I felt like I was in a, you know, in a rock and a hard place kind of position, because I had just left home, you know, and I needed cash to be able to support myself. So there was always that level of like feeling conflicted, because I loved it, but I was experiencing a lot of stigma around it, and I was, you know, losing relationships because of it.
So
and
it was your social group that you were getting stigma?
I didn't meet any street performers really until years later. Like, I had started working very much in isolation by myself I had never seen a living statue before. I'd read about it, but I had never interacted with anybody. And my first real experience with another street performer was actually Chalkmaster Dave, who took me under his wing and, you know, mentored me and taught me all the wisdom that he had. But that was several years later. So I had already been working in this narrow kind of like,
what was your first few days like then? I know you said it went well and you made money, but when you first arrived, were you nervous? Did you have an idea of how to work what you were doing, or did you really pick it up as you were going along?
I definitely was picking it up where I went along. You know, when you're interested in stuff like animation and comics and stuff like that, you tend to naturally be like a fairly introverted individual who observes instead of reacts to the world. So for me, it felt like it was the correct thing to do at that correct time of my life, because I was very observant. I was very aware of my surroundings. I was very aware of people and movement, because, you know, when you're doing animation, you're drawing different kinds of walk cycles and learning all the different characters and personalities. So I treated it like an exercise and kind of like seeing all the different ways people move. And so it was definitely less about performance. But there was always still that performance element there. One of my first characters was the angel, and the one thing I did was I would make up these like nihilist kind of like fortunes and like proverbs or whatever, and just like hand them out to people. So people would be like, "Oh my God, it's a beautiful angel," and then it would just have this like weird, absurd kind of like, you know, existence is meaningless. I'd be like, "What the fuck?" and walk away. So to me, it always felt natural. It didn't ever feel like, I never really felt nervous. The only time I would feel nervous if would be the anticipation is somebody going to be on my spot, you know, when I show up. But of course nobody was, because it was a shit pitch. Like it wasn't a pitch, you know? But it was, there would always be that anticipation of like, is there going to be somebody here? I don't know.
But that's quite interesting, because you talk about being what essentially I take from your description, being quite an introverted person. But then you went out there on the street and turned it on, what it seems like that.
Yeah. I have no rational explanation for that. It's like why I can perform in front of a camera and be, you know, eloquent when I'm doing my listening parties. But then, you know, as soon as the camera turns off, I'm like, well, time to, you know, turn into a goblin again in my hoodie and kind of hide.
Well, I can certainly empathize with that. I don't think you're alone in having that duality to your nature.
Yeah, so, I think a lot of us are like that.
You said you started writing these little pieces to give as your angel character, and it seemed like you were inserting pieces of yourself into what you were doing. In these 2 years before you hooked up with Chalkmaster Dave, how did your work progress? What did you start feeling about it?
It was a slow process. I'm a slow learner. I'm completely honest about this. Like, it'll take me forever to fucking learn something, but then when something clicks, it really fucking clicks, and then I just go off to the races, and then suddenly I'm reading War and Peace in grade 6, you know, when I couldn't read in grade 1, and I was struggling with basic words. So, you know, it started off with this impulse of like, I love the juxtaposition of this ethereal looking angel being a cheeky motherfucker, you know, bringing people down back to earth. And then it just kind of evolved because obviously, like, I didn't like the concept of having to, like, you know, produce pieces of paper that would litter, or, you know, like the practical things of that. It was costing me money to do that. And then eventually I started to realize I could tell stories through movement, and that, you know, being an actual still living statue is actually kind of boring. And, you know, using the platform, or using the I guess, yeah, the platform of the statue to you know, embellish on it and start, you know, bringing more things into it. You know, when I built my wind-up doll, the first thing that was in my head was like, you know, a little ballet dancer that spins around and around. So I trained myself to spin and make it look like I wasn't moving, you know, because that's music box dancers. They do that, you know. So a lot of it was coming from my interest in the uncanny valley and artificial lives, and the concept of making something artificial look realistic. And you know, obviously the tension is for us is we are real. So how do I make myself a real person become artificial and then animate it to make it realistic? So it always kind of came from that impulsive animation, like the observing body movement and how movement kind of works.
You're applying your other discipline into this craft.
Yeah, and then when I started like rolling with it, I was like, well, fuck animation, man. This shit's boring. Like this, it's like, you know, 30 seconds, you know, a week, you know, of work to get one, you know, like to get a movement like this takes like, you know, 2 fucking days to do that. Whereas I'm getting the immediate gratification. Plus now I'm getting an audience I'm getting the immediate feedback as well. So, you know, when you're doing stuff like film, it takes months and months and months to prepare, to produce, and then a year later you get to see the results of it when you go to a theater and, you know, people react to whatever your final product is.
And were you cognizant of this at the time? Is this something you were starting? Were you cognizant of this at the time? Was this something you were starting to understand while you were still studying?
Definitely. And it actually ruined a relationship because I was so much more interested in the immediacy of displaying the skill and using the storytelling, you know, in that regard. And you know, the person I was with felt that my job was gross, dirty. I was a grifter and didn't like it, and thought I was, you know, destroying my future, which was kind of hilarious in retrospect, considering, you
How
know.
did it make you feel at the time?
Oh, it was terrible. I felt terrible. It was, like I said, it was a really bad period of my life, which I don't necessarily want to get too much into, but
The
it
thing of it,
definitely affected me negatively.
did it make you question what you were doing? Were you having doubts? Were you thinking maybe they're right? Were you torn on
No,
it?
never, because I've one thing my parents always taught me was for better or for worse, was unwavering self-confidence. And the one thing that I took from my parents' failings was don't end up like them. And you end up like them by not being true to yourself, and by denying to be doing with your life. Because I saw everything that my parents were experiencing as a direct result of them not being themselves and not having the courage to do what made them truly happy.
Trying
So
to walk the trodden path as opposed to going off into the bushes, whereas they would have been happier being.
yeah, and I mean, I understand, you know, because of that, the context of being immigrants and having that social, you know, that social stigma already of like, well, you're not from this country and therefore you're not as assimilated and therefore you're not actually smart or whatever, you know, the xenophobia and all that kind of shit surrounding it. So I can completely understand, you know, what they were feeling and the pressure they felt. I just kind of saw where it fucked them, you know, and I certainly don't want to, I didn't want to relive that. You know, generational trauma is not a thing I want to carry with me.
And we'll complete the cycle again.
Exactly, you know?
So when you meet Chalkmaster Dave and he takes you under the wing, is this where you start learning more about the culture that exists on the street?
Yeah, he taught me unequivocally everything I know. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have the skill I have today. I wouldn't have the acumen that I have, and I wouldn't have the empathy that I have. He was a very, very, very important figure for me. He taught me so much about walk by and the importance of walk by. And, you know, especially having gone through the transition of becoming a circle show, and having had spent so many years doing walk by, I will always have the most profound respect for it and treat it with the reverence it fucking deserves that a lot of people don't treat it with, because there's so much nuance to it that separates it from doing circle shows. There's, you know, the intimacy that you get from it, and Chalkmaster was a genius at it. You know, he still is. You know, he
Why was
taught
he?
me, you know, all kinds of amazing tricks to communicate and connect with your audience on an individual level.
Well, what kind of things would he teach you?
Um, First thing he taught me right off the bat, working at Young and Dundas, which is probably one of the craziest spaces to work. Again, for those who are not from North America, it is basically like New York's Times Square. It is bustling. It is huge. There's crosswalks that cross all over the place. There's big billboards with lights everywhere. And so he immediately taught me how to be completely aware of my surroundings at all times while being able to deliver a show. Because when he would work, he would have his back to his audience while he was, on the ground drawing, but he was constantly moving around and making eye contact with people, acknowledging people. Another really important thing he taught me was never treat your gear or your money like it's the most important thing, because as soon as you put attention on it, then everybody is aware of it. And the goal is to create these transactions where it feels effortless and meaningless. And even if it means sacrificing, a $5 here and there because somebody with sticky fingers kind of goes in, you're less of a target if you can walk away from your gear and be like, I don't fucking care about that shit. I'm going to go have a smoke, or I'm going to, chat with my friend. Because that way you display your dominance of the space. Which, again, with, being female presenting adds an extra layer to that, needing to be able to dominate your space.
And when you were learning and pulling things together, being female presenting, was that a thing that created a lot more difficulty for you?
At the time, I would have said no, because I was young. And again, one of, strong thing my family taught me was very, very, they were very anti-gender norms. They were very ahead of themselves, especially for people, coming from the old world. They were very progressive people. And my dad specifically was very much like, I think he kind of loved the idea that I was, the type of person who would throw a punch, and he encouraged it. So, at the time I was so enthralled with this new, lifestyle and new career that I was probably not as aware as I should have been about, that kind of stuff. And the older I get, the more aware of it I become, and the more aware of the misogyny that we experience I become, and the more angry I get. But when I was younger, I was just so I was already angry. I was already, going through a thing where, I really felt the need to prove myself. So it didn't register, danger never registered. It still kind of doesn't to some degree with me. I can't really sometimes discern whether or not I can't assess the situation and be like, that's not a good idea. I'd be like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's fucking do it. So I kind of think that the blissful ignorance was a very positive thing.
Maybe it was a positive thing in the development of what you were doing. Maybe you wouldn't have dominated the space if you were continuously contemplating the worst things that were possibly going on around you.
Yeah, and I mean, I empathize with a lot of female presenting people, because I understand the social conditioning that happens when you're younger. A lot of women, non-binary, trans women, are socialized to not question, are socialized to, assess the situation while it's happening before reacting to it. But that was just not my upbringing. That was not the case for me. I was excommunicated from the Catholic Church because I questioned shit. And my parents were like, yeah. I got into street fights when I was a kid, and I never, if somebody tried to assault me on the street, I would hit first and ask questions later. So I was never socialized that way, but I understand that socialization happens, and I have empathy for that. And it's I can understand, why it's difficult for people and why they would be afraid of doing street shows or going out to do street shows when they've been socialized their whole life to second guess everything they do. I was just really kind of lucky, I guess, that way, that I wasn't socialized that way.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it also makes sense that because you were not second guessing yourself, you weren't worried, like the thing we talked about with the equipment, you held the space, you held a certain amount of confidence. You had a natural deterrent possibly to people who were going to fuck with you because they thought, oh no,
Yeah. And I think, it's as shitty as it is to have a shit home life, it prepared me for that, to kind of accept everything as a battle, going out at Young and Dundas for the first, bit really did feel like, all right, I'm going into fucking war, and I think that's what protects and makes somebody a good street performer.
Did you find it easy to? It was Chalkmaster Dave, right? Did you find it easy to have him take you under your wing? Then did you not have a little bit of like, I know what I'm doing, I can do this kind of thing?
I remember. I've always been the type of person who believes in bettering themselves. I don't kind of like, I have an ego for sure because I'm a fucking performer, and when I know I'm good at something, I'm not gonna be demure and be like, oh no, and I'll be like, no, I'm fucking great at this. But obviously I had only been street performing for a couple of years. I definitely had a lot to learn, and I deferred to him because I watched him get these massive crowds and hold them. And I thought it was just genius how somebody who just draws chalk characters, Marvel characters on the street, was able to hold these audiences. And I wanted to do that, and I've always looked upwards. I've never looked inwards. I've always looked outwards. And if somebody's better than me at something, I 100% accept it, and I want to be friends with them. I want to, learn from them. I don't ever think that I'm the greatest at anything, or that I'm beyond, learning new skills. So, when I was definitely a lot younger, it was like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. This guy knows what the fuck he's doing. Maybe you'll help me.
And did it help you then? It sounds like your show evolved and changed over the tutelage that you had from Chalkmaster Dave.
Definitely. He got me moving more. And again, it's not like we had a relationship where he was like taking notes and telling me what to do. It was more like, we would be doing our own thing. He invited me into the space. We met at a festival, and he was like, hey, you should come work at Young and Dundas. And I'm like, really? I can work there now? Because at the time he was kind of the guy dominating the space because he had to, because there was so much going on there. I mean, there's like street preachers, and it's a wild west, and he kind of held that fort. And so when I came in and we started dominating together, honestly, those were like the best years where we were holding it together, because I would be flanking one side, he'd be on the other side. We'd switch off. We would literally meet up every morning, have a coffee, and be like, okay, who's going to take the corner this time? Who's going to take the inward this time? And we just worked so well together. By that point, like eventually.
You got a pitch buddy.
Yeah, it was my first experience with a pitch buddy before I even had the words for that.
And what did you think about your life during this time? Was this a happy time? Were you starting to look at your craft and the world around you in a positive way?
It was a big period of change for me. I felt definitely, it was the first time in my life I held a job, which made me feel good, because up until that point I kind of felt like a loser piece of shit who kept getting fired from everything because I run my mouth too much. So it was kind of it was really nice, but it was also a difficult time again. A difficult few years of change and growth, and all that uncomfortable shit. But I happened to had just moved into my apartment that I lived in for years with awesome roommates. We were like a sitcom, an animator living with a street performer, living with a puppeteer, living with a blimp builder. And, it was just me and a bunch of guys who were all artsy running the joint. And so it was kind of, those moments were definitely the best part of that period, because I was like getting really good at my job. I was starting to earn, a living off of it comfortably, not just like, when I had first started out, when I first moved out, and I was like, counting my pennies, paying my rent, hoping I would make rent that month, and literally eating nothing because I couldn't afford food. So by that point, when I was working at Young and Dundas, I was building the craft. I was in a better home environment with awesome flatmates, and everything just started to kind of come together, and it gave me the environment to be able to play more and start treating the craft itself more seriously. Like I admit, I never saw myself as a performer. I saw myself as a busker. I was really fucking good at the grift. I was really fucking good at being able to extract money from people in a way that made them feel happy. That was the biggest excitement for me up until that point.
So
And then
you
by the
say you didn't
time,
see
you know,
yourself
I
as a
got
performer.
comfortable. You what?
You say you didn't see yourself as a performer. You saw yourself as a grifter, and you described a grifter, but you also described a performer. What separates a grifter and a performer? Where do
Well,
we draw
yeah,
the
you know
line?
what? And it is the same thing. I always had a fascination with the Old West when I was a kid, and I especially loved the story of the gamblers. And I think that for me, a lot of my push to go into busking was kind of seeing myself as like the modern day old timey gambler, you know, where I'm like, I roll into town and I do my show and make my money and then I leave, you know, like that to me was the epitome of the coolest lifestyle. But obviously you can't have that in the modern world. So what's the best way you can achieve something like that in the modern world? And it's basically being a touring performer.
And so it seems like at this point you formed the identity of yourself as a performer. You just described the kind of feeling you had of who you were. How did you then, in this happy time, advance? What changed as you progressed forward?
Um, I definitely accept at that point I found self-acceptance that I was gonna be a performer. And then what changed was I wanted more. I wanted to do more things. I wanted to make more art. Living statue is wonderful. Walk by is wonderful. And again, it's like I have the utmost respect for it as an art form. But you know, having grown up playing piano, you know, at a high degree of skill, and you know, studying film and story writing, and I always like when I was a child, I wanted to be a comic book artist. You can tell stories as a living statue, absolutely you can, but it's limited. And so I got to the point where I wanted to do
Why is it
more
limited?
for more and tell better, bigger stories.
Why is doing statue limited in terms of storytelling?
Well, it's a limited, I mean, as an art form, it is limited. You know, break it down to it's an installation. You know, to make money doing it effectively, you do micro shows. You don't do a 45. You can't really do a 45-minute show. Then it's not a statue anymore. Then you're, you know, a silent clown. Um, so you know the only way to maximize your financial input is by maximizing your output doing micro shows, 10-minute little shows. And those 10-minute little shows are really nice, but they're not really gratifying. And are they technically, I mean, they're technically a show, and then there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the end, you know, result is you scare a kid, or you know, like somebody comes up to you and gives you, you know, $5 or whatever. But I got stuck in the cycle of this is my job. I do this to make a living. I'm only making so much of a living to keep doing this. I can't better myself. And now I can't explore and expand, because anytime I explore and expand, I lose money and then I can't pay my rent. So it's this whole kind of Ouroboros that happens, which makes it super fucking challenging to get better at what you do and to explore things beyond that. One of my failings is being one of those types of people that throws myself into learning something, gets really excited, fucking masters it, and then gets bored by it. And then it's like, okay, so what next now? What else can I consume to get better at what I want to do eventually? You
And is
know?
this the kind of position you found yourself in, that you'd
Yeah,
reached kind of a balance and you were
yeah.
earning enough to live, you had a craft that was good enough to support you, then it kind of got boring. It was like there wasn't enough change and movement and yourself you could pump into it.
Yeah, because I never really had the luxury of having support, you know, from my parents or from a partner or from, I mean, up until now, my partner is fucking fantastic. But like, you know, up until that point, I didn't have the luxury of having any safety net, of any support, of any help. It made progression difficult. And additionally, being somebody who's female presenting, who treats their job seriously and wants to be taken seriously and isn't going to fucking play games of, you know, hooking up with somebody to, you know, better my career. Again, not that I'm ragging on anybody who does that, because we got to work with what we've got. That was just not where I wanted to go, because I've always just personally never really led with sexuality, you know, so that was just never really on the table for me.
So
It became increasingly difficult.
because you're here now and you've done an incredible diversity of different things over the years. So how did you move forward out of this, as you described it, or as I'll describe it? But I think this is what you described, out of the rut that you found yourself in.
I guess necessity is the mother of invention. Like, you know, where there's a will, there's a way. I was very fortunate when I built Madame Guillotine, that at the time, God, that was about 7 years ago I built that show, probably.
So we've got a lot of time in between this, because we're talking about
Oh,
when
I
you
was
were
just resentful. All that time in between, I started to become really resentful. I started to hate my life. I started to, you know,
Did you make the same pitch? Was it the same thing day after day after day? Were you going
um,
around, moving about?
no, I started touring. I went on my first tour, probably about like 13 or 14 years ago. I went to Italy to visit my family. I started working the street in Italy because you
How was the
what?
difference? How was the difference between working in Canada and then going and working in Italy?
I remember the first day being like, whoa, nobody's out at like 11 o'clock in the morning. Like, I remember showing up in like, I think it was Verona or somewhere. I remember like showing up like really early in the morning, like by Italian standards, not by North American or British standards, where y'all fucking meet at the draw, like the same here in Canada. I remember like showing up at like Canadian time and being like, where is everybody? What are they doing? And then like, you know, siesta time, and then realizing, oh shit, nobody actually goes out for work until like after 4 p.m. here because, oh yeah, it's so fucking hot here. Duh.
So you have
So
very much evening culture, right?
yeah, so learning to transition from daytime to evening shows was really tough because
Why was it,
you what?
why was it tough? Why is it so? It's just different light conditions, surely.
Because I've always been a very structured individual, despite my, you know, lackadaisical lifestyle. I still like to wake up at a certain time, get my workout in, you know, do my thing, and not having structure or having my structure dramatically altered, kind of was very challenging. Obviously, I've been doing this for long enough now that I go with the flow, do whatever the fuck, you know. But when I was younger, it was very, very challenging. Like, you have to appreciate when I was a kid. I was a homebody. I had no friends. My parents would have to bribe me to get me out of the house. Most of my, you know, childhood and teenage years were spent in my room hiding, drawing. So to suddenly be thrust into this lifestyle where I'm literally chasing money across the world as opposed to going to a 9-to-5 job, just completely changed my whole perspective on reality.
How did you deal with the transition from daytime to nighttime then? What was the first show like when you went in Italy and performed in the evening time where people are going to sit spritz and
Yeah.
they're kind of,
It
you know,
it made me realize, I think that was kind of the definitive moment of like realizing street performing is actually like not just about extracting money from people in creative ways. It's actually about creating atmosphere. And I kind of knew that to an extent, but Canada doesn't exactly have like, not to brag on my own country, but like it doesn't really have like a huge culture of art. It doesn't have a lot of support for art. So
okay,
the art that we produce, you know, in Canada sometimes feels limited to what our arts councils decide is what art is or whatever. So, you know, doing a show in the evening where, you know, the sun's going down and everybody's just chilling and, you know, it really made me realize like there's actual power in the performance of this stuff. This is actually really cool. I'm feeling things now. Like I'm feeling, you know, like I'm making somebody's night. I'm feeling connections. I'm feeling the atmosphere happening. So it definitely shifted, and and that's the biggest thing I brought home with me was creating, you know, making my street stage a stage with atmosphere, and that's when I started working with music, and I started, you know, bringing in, you know, people into my circle, making them feeling things as opposed to, you know, making them be like, well, that scared me.
you're constructing a through narrative and a theme and a kind of sense of atmosphere in the space you're working in, right?
Yeah.
And so you go to Italy. Do you go to other places in Europe on your way?
That trip, I just went to Italy because I didn't know what to expect. And I didn't know really what to do. I'm a European citizen, so it was just made the most sense to just kind of go visit my family and hang out with them. And if everything falls to shit, I can just at least have a vacation and just hang out with them. So I didn't really explore after that one. And I didn't really go back to Europe until a few years later. But it was
Well,
definitely like an informing experience.
just for touching and going back to Europe, when you came back from Italy and you started building more stuff into your work and creating the atmosphere as we just talked about, what was you? Did you have a goal? Did you have an aim? Did you have a sense of something you were trying to create?
I definitely wanted to take my craft more seriously at that point. So I think that that was kind of the definitive, like, okay, I need to get training in mime. I want to actually become good at the skills. Whether or not I was ever great at the skills is debatable. But I definitely sought training. I
So who did
definitely
you
wanted to
experience?
increase my visual aesthetic as opposed to being thrifted. Whatever I could cobble together costumes. That's when I taught myself how to sew, and I started making my own stuff, and I started to put more thought and intention into every detail. So like everything has a reason for being on the costume, everything has a reason for existing. I would actually draw out the characters that I wanted to create so that I had, an actual physical visual representation, and just as opposed to like, wow, that's a cool idea.
And so there's a lot of things that come from there. The first thing I'd like to unpack is you said you went to go and study mime.
Yeah.
So did you go to a sorry? Did you go to a school to study mime? Was there a certain person you went under tutelage with, or
I studied privately with master, and it was actually how we met was kind of interesting. Giuseppe Candello used to run the Winnipeg Mime Festival, student of Etienne de Crew, an incredible corporeal mime artist. So the Canadian Opera Company, the Four Seasons Centre for Performing Arts in Toronto, used to have these really, really cool lunchtime free concert series. And when, obviously, and there were like Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Tuesdays are obviously not a day you street perform in Toronto because you just don't. So I used to just go to those because I love classical music, and I always wanted to, I couldn't afford to go to the fucking opera, so it was like, oh, these really cool free concerts, that's awesome, cool. And I went to one, and they were doing a string quartet, doing Shostakovich string quartet, and with a mime artist. And I was like, that sounds cool. Cool performance art, weird. And then I watched his performance, and I was like, this guy's cool. Like, whatever the fuck this is, I could use this in statue. And corporeal mime is my late friend and mentor, Paul Wildbaum, used to describe pantomime is objective mime. And that is, you are creating an objective world. You are imposing, you're physically opening doors using weights. Whereas corporeal mime is subjective mime. It's more about the internal, about externalizing feelings, emotions, and telling story through movement that way. Both are storytelling techniques. One is more physical. I'm physically opening a fucking door, walking against the wind. The other one is more, I'm reacting to how the wind, is blowing on me. And so when I started studying what we refer to as subjective mime, it was after watching that performance, and I was like, this is really cool because this can integrate really well in living statue because it's very beautiful movement and gesture. And it's not, schlocky, like not at all to rag on pantomime, because I've also studied it with Paul Wildbaum, and I loved it, and I probably use it more in my work. But corporeal mime just always felt like something I really connected with, because it breaks your body down the way we would as animators, and the way we would break down a walk cycle. So I went up to him after the concert, and I was just like, hey, do you teach? And he had just come back from Winnipeg, you know, his own story to tell, but had just moved back to Toronto, hadn't, you know, was doing this project because he, you know, he wanted to stay connected. He was teaching like high school. He was kind of going through a thing himself, and he was kind of like, well, I don't really teach, and I'm living in a like bachelor apartment. And I was kind of like, cool, like, can I come over? And so that's kind of what happened. And then I started training with him, and I trained with him for about 3 years, and it was great. Yeah.
And did you take to it like a duck to water? Was it something you found very easy to understand and to integrate into what you were doing, or was it a slow grinding process to really get the mechanics of what was going on?
Physically, I think I took to it. I mean, it's really interesting when you look at, like, you know, I was watching the opening thing of my videos. I'm like, you can sort of see some of the training in there, but not really, because when you're on the street, it's different than being in a controlled theater environment where I can actually focus, you know, on my undulations. But when you're on the street, you have to really be primarily focused on your fucking audience. So technique kind of goes out the window. So I can kind of like see some technique kind of going in there, you know, in some of those videos. But like, physic in the physicality sense, I did take to it. I just never really like, I was just never really going to be the greatest at it, and I knew that it was never going to be the thing that would be, you know, my primary discipline that I care so much about in the world. I've always struggled with what's my thing, you know, because I love telling stories. I love taking people on a journey, and I don't really care how, which is why I think I took to online content creation, because to me it's just another vehicle. So when I studied mime, it was like, this is helpful, and this is a great tool. I'm probably not going to use all of this, but I'm glad that I have it in my toolkit now.
And did you very rapidly integrate it into your street work and
Oh,
start
yes.
applying the techniques?
Yes, I remember actually at Young and Dundas, because where we were performing, they had these big windows, and around like 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun hits, you can actually see your reflection. So I remember just for hours from like 3 till 6, every fucking day I was working, I would just watch my lines and make sure I was doing, like, you know, my illusions well, and just watching myself, not even caring about my fucking audience. You know, for the first like year, I was just like, oh, this is cool.
And so you say a few years later you went on another tour. Is that because you felt like you were ready, you'd created something?
It just kind of happened. I didn't really put any thought or intention into my career. If I put thought and intention into my career, I probably would have had a circle show a lot earlier than I did. I just kind of always go with, you know, just go with the flow, go with what's working, go with what I have at that time, what opportunities arise. I had an opportunity to go on my first tour while I was in university, and I regret not taking the opportunity, but I was convinced, no, you should not drop out of university and go on tour. You should finish your degree, by somebody who literally is nothing but a mere footnote in my, you know, my future career. And so after those experiences, and having spent so many years under the thumb of expectations, I kind of was like, yeah, peace out, motherfucker. I'm taking every opportunity I can. So it was never really about, I'm planning this career and I'm planning this thesis for my life like David Bowie. It was more like, you know, this is happening now. Cool. Let's dive in.
And so what opportunity showed itself to you to go on the tour the second time?
Pardon me?
What opportunity showed itself to you to go on tour the second time?
I was just invited from a festival. Like Toronto Busker Fest was a huge impact. If it wasn't for Toronto Busker Fest, I wouldn't have a career.
Why was it such a big impact then? Why
the booker walked by me one day when I was busking very early on, gave me her card, and then suddenly I'm in this, like, and again, you have to appreciate, I didn't know what busking was. I had never met another fucking street performer in my life. And suddenly I'm in this festival dedicated to what we do for a living. And I'm realizing, oh shit, this is like a job. And, you know, wow, there's people that are doing this for real, like full time. Whoa. And I was thrust in this position where, I've got huge crowds and that kind of stuff. And rather than get afraid of it, I rose to it because I wanted to make, the booker proud, because she just saw me on the street. She didn't know who the fuck I was. I could have been anything to her. And I was like, well, I better have a good impression on this person. So I think Toronto Busker Fest was kind of that pivotal kind of thing that gave me the confidence to be like, oh, so I can do what I did here in other places around the world. That's really cool. Let's fucking do that.
And so where did you get booked when you went on the tour the second time? What festival was it?
Oh God, I couldn't remember at this point. I can't even remember what I did. The sad part is I don't remember half the places I've been in the world. I have to look at my passports and look at the stickers. And then I had one passport just taken away from me that was like 4 years filled up. So I don't even remember that 4 years.
Do you remember the experiential qualities, at least, of going on that tour the second time?
Feels like such a blur. It really does feel like a blur. I remember meeting lots of other, awesome performers and networking with people and experiencing really cool personalities and realizing there's a lot more people like me out there, which was cool. I can't remember what those tours were. I really can't. I mean, they were definitely within Canada. It wouldn't have been overseas. At that point, I can't even remember my first overseas gig. I think was China in 2008, 7. I don't even remember.
And what was that like? Do you remember the experience of going to China? It's a very different culture.
It's funny because I've spent a lot of time in China in the last few years that I'm like, now I know. I remember at the time, it was my first international gig. And I had been to Italy. I have had spent time in Europe, with family and stuff. And so, and again, growing up as cultural diaspora, I've always felt in between. I've always felt in between Canada and Europe. I've never really felt like I belong here or there. That's just the thing, the first generation complex of every child who's first generation is that cultural diaspora of who am I? Because I don't fit in with you guys, but I don't fit in with you guys. So going to China was really cool because it was the first time I felt like I was in an environment that I clearly did not know anything about or didn't feel any kind of connection with or any kind of thing. And it was also back then was still during the first child policy. So
Wow.
there was a lot of, there was a lot of othering happening with the media and news. It was also when the melamine thing was happening, so we weren't allowed to have dairy. And the West has always had a complicated relationship with China and vice versa. And it definitely that experience did not give me the depth of understanding that I now have, and the wisdom. I think,
experience.
What
Why didn't it give you a depth of experience? I suppose the first question really to get into this is, what did you do there?
We did this clown festival. If you've ever worked in Asia, it's never going to be what they say on paper. So it was definitely my first experience with adapting on the fly and learning to be a good performer for my bookers. Learning to roll with the punches and not, freak out, not lose my shit, not get, yeah, exactly. Just, everything's fine. And I was very lucky that we had a crew that was primarily of really strong performers that were like that. There was not one person. I was in Beijing a couple of years ago, and there was clearly somebody who had never ever traveled internationally in their life, and watching their mental health degenerate. And I've experienced this a few times on many tours. When I was in West Africa and Sierra Leone, I literally witnessed somebody fucking lose their shit. And it's fascinating psychologically to watch this happen. But it can happen to anybody at any time. And I was really lucky on that first gig when we had weird shit happen, like teenagers pointing their AK-47s at us because there was a miscommunication because the client said we weren't allowed to leave the festival site during the day and go back to our hotels, but our agent said we were, and then suddenly they're pointing guns at us. Those could have been an experience where somebody would lose their shit. But because our crew was just kind of just rolling with the punches, we're like, oh, and there's a gun. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the green room. So I was lucky that the crew was pretty rad on that one.
So you've gone to China, you come back, and are you now setting on continuously touring? Are you starting to travel around and do festivals?
Yeah, and that's when I had started traveling and touring within Canada before then, because that's how I got that gig in China, was doing some festival in Canada. So I had already been touring for a few years at that point, and there had already been media about me and that kind of stuff. So you could Google me, and people would know who I was by Googling me at that point.
A presence, I believe.
Yeah, there was a presence enough there. So that was just, I just remember that being the first real international gig. And then after that, as you yourself know, working in the entertainment industry, once you just, you force through, the water forces through that one little hole, it just kind of explodes. And then you're working all the time and you're going everywhere. And then suddenly you're like, well, now the new skill I have to learn is balancing, my mental health with all of the work I'm getting, which, is hard.
How did that affect you then? How did start touring and working more regular affect you? Was it not something that you was pleased about, you were happy with?
I had difficulty with it because I'm naturally introverted. So I had to learn very quickly, I still struggle with being able to balance needing alone time with being go, 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 go. I've had some interesting experiences through the course of my life where I've faced physical danger and just muscled through it. And so I kind of treated it like that for the first few years, where it was like, just go, just don't think, just do. Don't think, just act. And of course that is not sustainable in the long term, so I was definitely going crazy, working, taking all the opportunities I could get. And then I would get depleted, and then I would get creatively depleted. And then you end up in a shit position where you're like, I fucking hate my life and I hate everything. And, what's the point to all of this?
And so it sounds like you reached a point of exhaustion and depression. You got burnt out. Did you stop working for a while then?
Yeah, it was exhaustion. It was creative depletion. It was also knowing I could do more with my life, because I was still wrestling with, is this your career? Is this really what you want to do for the rest of your life? Like, do you really want to do this for the rest of your life? Do you want to be 60-year-old grizzled Marie Antoinette statue? Like, is that what you want to do? Is that sustainable given who you are physically? There's, I make no pretense to say that I don't have a shelf life. Unfortunately, as a female presenting individual, you have a shelf life if you are working in a specific direction with what you're doing. And while I wasn't necessarily relying on my looks, I was relying on my youthful charm that suddenly become creepy when you're 40, and that kind of thing. Like, context changes. It's really cute to be a cute little wind-up doll that looks like fucking Winona Ryder when you're 20, but when you're, 40, it has a different context. And also, I just never wanted to be pigeonholed into doing the same thing every fucking day. And that was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. That's why I avoided having a job, a conventional job, it was because I didn't want to, just do one thing for 25, 30 years and that was it. I always wanted to challenge myself and grow.
So how did you deal with these feelings then?
At the time, I didn't. I buried it and I worked. And then eventually it bubbled over and I was not happy with my life and I wanted to torch everything. And that's when I decided to build my show, because I was like, either I build a show or I torch my life, and that's it. I can't do this for the rest of my life. Like I refuse to be mediocre for the rest of my life.
Well, I didn't think your statue was mediocre, but it's not. It doesn't care what other people feel about it at the time. When you've internalized something, you've got to deal with it. How did you go about it then? How did you go about trying to reinvent yourself, for want of a better term?
Well, it's really hard as a living statue, because not many living statues make it out alive. Like lots of people, like in the statue community, there's so many people that talk about building a show, and it's difficult to build a show, especially when you're good at what you do, like I was, and you're making great money at what. Like I took a pay cut to build my show. I was doing really, really well financially.
Really sorry to interrupt, because I'm very much interested in constructing a show, but you said something which twigged something in my mind, which I've not touched on in the podcast yet. You said the statue community. Is there an international statue community?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's communities for jugglers. This shouldn't be a surprise. There's there's living statue festivals that are specific to that, and it's a very specific personality type.
What's the community like? I mean, do you guys get around and sit still together? Like, what's the social media between everybody?
Okay, so it kind of reminds me a little bit of the goth scene, which is why I'm like, I get you folks. In that maybe I'm gonna get some hate mail after this, but it tends to be a lot of like socially awkward misfit types, and very insular minded people, very like, people who are, introverted and that kind of thing, but have that, need to perform. And it's a very interesting community, to say the least. It's very competitive on the street. Lots of street statues are absolutely like awful people to each other. Some are wonderful, lovely people to each other. I've had some severely negative experiences. And in fact, like, I don't ever recalling having a positive experience statuing in Covent Garden. But I still love and, support and continue to do whatever I can. But when I statued there, I got muscled out and moved to the square where I think it's like an Urban Outfitters or whatever, just right outside of Covent. And they pushed me there like aggressively. And then I ended up just building a crowd and taking their crowd, because I was like, fuck this shit. Like, fuck you guys. I'm better than all of you. If you're not going to play nice with me, I'm not going to play nice with you. So, I find that statues on the street, on the hard street, tend to be very, very, very protective, because I understand it is, they generally don't make as much money as circle shows, and they have to fight to keep their spots. But in the festival circuit, they're generally wonderful people. Like a lot of people who do living statue are thoughtful, artistic, intelligent people that really feel a connection to it. Like I find a lot of statues, and this is where I fall off relating to statues. They love it as an art form. They're like, they have hard on for it. They're like, this art form fucking rocks. Whereas I'm like, it's a tool for me, but like, that's really awesome that you love it. I don't know if it's for me, but cool. I don't know if I love it as much as you do, but it's awesome that you love it.
So you moved on, and the reason that you were talking, we got onto this, was talking about creating a new piece of work. And so where do you do this? How do you begin creating this new piece of work?
Well, I was really, really lucky, very, very lucky that I have amazing support from my agents and bookers and people from busker festivals in Canada, who love the work that I do, who are excited by the work that I do. My earliest experience with being pushed into doing a circle show was actually, and this makes me sound like a fucking like princess, was actually at the World's Busker Festival in Christchurch, New Zealand. Jody, who used to book, booked me for the festival as a statue, which again, as a living statue to do those kinds of festivals, unless you're fucking, unless you're fucking somebody, they're not going to pay for a flight for you unless you're good at what you do and you are worth the flight. So having to prove you're worth the flight in the first place is really fucking hard. And so when I got there, she had been like, "Oh yeah, I heard a lot about you, and I've heard you're really good." And then she put me on the kids pitch in the park, because this was, of course, after the earthquake. So she put me on the kids pitch, and then kind of made this thing where it was like, it was not a big deal, but it was a big deal where the stage has to have acts so they don't lose the people who are at the kids pitch. And so it was kind of like, look, I know you're a statue and I know that you don't do stage shows, so it's not a big deal if you don't keep the crowd, but it's kind of a big deal if you don't keep the crowd. So there was this kind of like, I was put in this position where I'm like, fuck it, let's just do a show.
What did you do?
So I tried cobbling together a little show with my wind-up doll, and I managed to hold them long enough for the next performer. And Jody kind of confessed to me after the fact that she kind of did it on purpose to force me to do it, which was like kind of awesome.
And so from that point where you set, did you do little bits at each festival you went to and just expanded your repertoire? Or did you go somewhere to sit and write and construct something?
I went to Edinburgh to write my show. So I was doing a festival in Calgary, unfortunately named Cyst Fest. It was a disaster. It was a really wonderful time. It was a really wonderful time. It was a fucking disaster. Like literally, I got into a fist fight with a wino homeless guy who was throwing rocks at me, like in my fucking costume. He was throwing rocks at me, and I chased him down and just like started beating him down in the middle of a festival, which was not it was a festival, but not a festival. It was a, I don't even know how to describe this fest. It was a one-time thing. We all went to do it to help our friend Jimbo out. It was not a good time doing shows. It was an excellent hang. You know those gigs where it's like, you're gonna have epic hang stories, but you're not making any money out of it. In fact, you're probably gonna lose money on this. And so one night we were hanging out. Sorry, what?
Go out there, get it done, then come back and hang.
Yeah. And so one night we were hanging out at Jimbo's house around his bonfire, and they were kind of like, so when are you gonna build a show? Like, you should really build a show, and like you should do it. And I was kind of like, yeah, I'd love to take a year off and lose money, but like that's not gonna happen. And what am I gonna do anyway? Like, I'm not a magician. I'm a very basic passive, I can club pass, I can juggle fire torches, but I can't do any tricks. Like, as a juggler, I'm competent, but I'm not fucking amazing. I can hat juggle, I can do a couple of things, but like, I don't care enough about it, the skill. I care about storytelling. I don't really care about spending the hours to learn another skill, that I'm not going to be the great at, that I know I'm just not going to be great at. And so, they were Kim Potter and Jimbo were like, hey, why don't you try doing like a trunk style show where you tell a story with audience volunteers? Like, you're a mime, you know how to communicate with people. And then I'm like, cool, what the fuck would I do? I don't want to do like, Lee Ross, like, telling a movie. I don't want to steal other people's ideas. That's not genuine to me. If I'm going to do this, I want it to be genuine. And then Jimbo was like, I know a guy who's selling a magic guillotine. Do you want to buy it? I can hook it up for you. And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, Marie Antoinette, you've already got the character. You already know what your character is doing. You already know exactly how she's going to respond to the audience. Why don't you get a magic guillotine and build a show around that? Duh. And I'm like, that's a great idea. So that afternoon, or the next day rather, hooked it up, got myself a temporary road case to ship it back to Canada, to Toronto with me, and got this magic guillotine, and then was like, well, now I have to write a show around it. And so I was working on it. It was very difficult to work on it in Canada because there aren't any shows like mine in Canada. It's a very European kind of model. So all of the advice I was getting from the local performers, which, it was valuable advice, but it was was like, hype show stuff, put fire on it, make it a love story, like all of the things that are antithesis to my approach to street theater. I was just being rammed down my throat unintentionally, like with the best of intentions. So I was like, I need to fucking go to Edinburgh and work on this. And Ernesto Magnifico was staying at my house, and he was like, we're getting you a plane ticket to Edinburgh this afternoon. And we walked down, and he went with me to go buy my fucking ticket to go to Edinburgh. And then he generously helped me write a stronger finale than what I had been using at the time. And he directed my finale. He directed it. And then when I went to Edinburgh, I had the foundation so that I wasn't like dying on my ass. I mean, I certainly did enough of that on that first year. But I remember showing up to the draw, and everybody that I knew in Edinburgh that I had known were like, what are you doing in the circle draw? And it was kind of like, yep, I'm here. Try to make it not as hard on me, please. I'm already feeling like shit. But everybody was super supportive. And then, as it goes in Edinburgh, we're, like Dave Southern is helping me write, and JP is helping me with structure. And, the beauty of what Edinburgh is fundamentally came together to really build the show,
And so when you did your first show there, how did the first show go?
In Edinburgh? I remember that one. In fact, there's like photographic evidence from Yukina and Chris from Funny Bones in Japan. And I had known them from doing the Canadian festival circuit and also doing a little bit of Asia as a statue. And I remember Yukina being really excited to see my show. And she actually had said to Chris, and he had forwarded to me, that she was excited to see where I was going to go with it. I remember it was on the Mound 2. It was it was Mound 2. And I had, rookie mistake, hadn't checked my gear, just arrived, like in time to get my pass, do the draw, get my show. And I hadn't checked my guillotine, and it was fucking broken, like broken as shit. And I remember Dave Southern happened to be biking by with Pepe, and he, being Dave, is like, what's all this? All right, don't worry, we'll fix this. And literally with duct tape and dreams, we managed to get it working. And that was my first time doing a festival like Edinburgh, where it was street and you were timed, and it was like that classic festival, like you have to get on and off or you get penalized. And I was shitting bricks because it was a brand new show, brand new finale. My main prop is fucking broken. I'm lactose intolerant, and you people in Britain don't have fucking non-dairy whipping cream. I'm just like, doing my cake eating act with full dairy, and I'm just like not feeling good, jet lagged. My guillotine's gonna break at any second. I may kill the guy in the guillotine. We have no idea what's gonna happen. And it was just that beautiful moment of like total chaos that I live for, where I'm like, everything's falling apart. Awesome. We can go off script and this is going to be fun. And it was a fun show.
And so when you went off script and you played, did it feel natural within that new environment? Did it feel like something that made sense to you?
Yeah, I was still, I was still married to structure and afraid, again, more so for the timing, because I'd never experienced time cards. And I just wanted to make sure I got through the show. But, I've always been really into improvisation. And I love off the cuff, looking for distractions. I know, and certainly at the time I wasn't very good with it, as, I grew to be, and I can continue to grow to be. Working with distractions. And it was my first time kind of really working with distractions and embracing them rather than being petrified of them.
Yeah. And so how did the show change over the month from the beginning to the end?
Oh, man, the story changed. Although I was still running into the same pitfalls of like, oh, you're a female presenting show. You should be there should be fighting over you. And I'm like, do you even know who you're fucking talking to? Like, dude, it's an execution. They're peasants. I'm a high status white clown. Like, no. don't want to marry them. I want to kill them all. You know, the whole goal is for them to take out the peasant frustration on the 1%. I am the symbol of the 1%. I need to die. I need to go. You know, like I'm the one that needs to go. I have to. They're the ones that win. Like my intention was always the audience wins the show. I'm not a hero. I am a villain, and I need to go. And the audience by the end of the show should realize we're all in this together against this person, which is kind of a high stakes thing to do in a street show because, you know, we're supposed to be loved and they want to love us, they want to give us money. So, you know, having to resist people's best intentions of, we want you to be loved. It's like, yeah, but I don't want to be loved. I want them to love themselves and love each other. And like, you know, I want them to have a cathartic experience. My show's a cathartic experience. It's not a positive, uplifting experience.
So how did the show change over the month then? What did you have at the beginning in the story that you didn't have at the end?
I think it was just more refining the why. You know, as a child, I loved, and I still love, absurdist comedy. I love stuff like Wonder Chosen. I grew up on Ren and Stimpy. And in fact, most of my show music is Ren and Stimpy production music as a result. So I love not having a reason for stupid shit happening. But unfortunately, when you are doing street, you need to tell simple stories. And really to achieve, you know, the abstract, absurd visual or conceptual stuff, it's just beyond where I was as a performer at the time. I don't know if it's beyond where I am now. You know, I've certainly, I'd be curious to do a show that's entirely absurdist. You know, but at the time I knew I was limited in my skill set. And so when I was doing certain things that I thought was, you know, really abstract and funny, it didn't read because I didn't really know how to present it properly. So it was more refining yeah, exactly, the framing. And it was like, why are they fighting? Why are they fighting with bread? Why are we eating cake together? Why? So throughout the month of Edinburgh is when I really found the why for the show.
And so you've finished Edinburgh, you've done the run, you've got, by the end, probably done 30 shows minimum. You've got a working show now. What did you do with it?
I came back to Canada and I shopped it. I started really refining things. I started to, you know, I had the confidence after that to go out on the street, because at that point I had really built that show in festivals because I had really kind and amazing producers that took a chance on me, knowing it was going to be shit. But they were like, yeah, but you're good at what you do, and I know you're going to be good eventually. So we'll let you take the shit time slots at the festival, you know, and support you that way. So when I got back to Canada, that's when I was like, yeah, I could totally go on any street corner and fucking do the show now. It's not just a festival show, you know. Now I can actually like start from nothing and build an audience.
And you think that's because you had the experience in the festivals of working the show through, so you were confident on the bones of the show, so you could take it and then just grind to build a crowd, which you were probably doing a lot of that stuff as a statue anyway, because statues, you still need to have people there, right?
Oh, like I was legendary in Canada at one point for the crowd sizes I would get as a statue. And it was so frustrating for me because I could fucking stand there as a wind-up doll and get a 3-person deep fucking crowd at Yonge and Dundas. And I have this show where I'm actually doing something and I can't even get 2 people to stop, you know? It was just such a mind fuck to go from like, I know if I'm just doing my thing, I can get a fucking 3D crowd. All I need to do is just stand and look intense and have the music going and do one thing and I'll have a captive audience. So to go from that where I'm like literally doing nothing to now I'm going to do all the things, and why are they not staying? What the shit? That was definitely a mind fuck. And it was, that first year at Edinburgh was really tough on me mentally because I prepared myself for it. I knew I was going to go back to the bottom of the barrel. Like I knew I was going from, you know, a place where I was really shit hot at what I did down to nothing, but I wasn't prepared for how hard it was to build again. I thought, in my naivety, I was like, well, you've already got the foundation. So what? It's going to be like a couple months tops before you're, building a decent enough crowd to do a decent enough show. But no, it took a long time, a lot longer than I thought it would, because the timbre is so different, the interaction is so different, and the way you engage with your audience is just so different. And it can be overwhelming, when you're doing a circle show comparatively, because you have so many people to keep an eye on that you're actively working with and you're moving around the space with. And now you've got this other variable of volunteers. And working with volunteers, I struggled with at first because I didn't really understand the psychology of volunteers, because it was not something I ever really worked with. Like, yeah, I'd get people to come up to me when I was statuing and interact with me, and kids to wind me up, and somebody to dance with, do a dance routine. But I never really had the full 45-minute experience with volunteers, where I've got to coax performances now out of people who never performed before.
And you've got to be able to ride that wave of having people come out, be nervous, and then have them come out of their shell and create that empathetic experience with the audience that you were looking for, with them feeling happy.
Yeah, and I think at first I was not good with that, because I absolutely lacked empathy towards them in that regard, because I've just never really felt afraid. So I was just oblivious to the fact that some volunteers would actually be terrified. And I didn't know what to look for, because it, again, wasn't in my wheelhouse. And I had some really unfortunate experiences, in that regard. I mean, nothing like life-altering or anything, but, those experiences where you feel like I let somebody down, I let that volunteer down because I didn't know what I was doing, and I want to avoid doing that in the future. And I was really lucky because I had performers, give me advice and say, here's the psychology of what you need to be looking for in your volunteers. When you're doing your crowd build, don't think about building your crowd to build a crowd. You're building your crowd to find your volunteers, and just things like that, and here's why you choose this type of personality for your volunteer, because you're going to get the best performance out of everybody who's like this, and learning all of those tricks, you're like, oh yeah, that does work. I understand that now. And then it becomes this whole greater, intellectual process of understanding how social, construct works, and how social conditioning works, and why. And then it makes you kind of question, sometimes, am I doing the right thing? Or am I supporting, social norms that are harmful by engaging? You what?
I was going to say, why did you say that? But you were about to say that anyway, so I was unneeded.
I think it's because, like, as somebody who grew up with a unstructured, I was given permission to explore gender expression, and explore, doing whatever I wanted to do, not what was socially conditioned to me. I've always wanted to foster that in an audience. I've never had the courage to do it. I've always kind of relied on the certain specific types of volunteers because I know it works. But I'd love to, explore the ability of, like, having female volunteers, for example, or female presenting volunteers, and put them in a really cool position where they're actually doing something other than throwing a fucking machete or being a love interest sitting on a chair waiting for, the dude. I've always wanted to explore that because I've been given that permission, but I also understand why it doesn't happen, because I remember very early on, before I built Madame Guillotine, when I was, like, trying to cobble together street shows as a terrible, whiteface mime, without any real character, very one-dimensional thing. I remember doing a bit with somebody at Young and Dundas where I did a fall, and everybody looked like, oh my God, she fucking hurt herself, as opposed to that was funny. And then I realized, oh yeah, it's because society actually looks at me fucking differently. And I think that's why, moving online, doing the online content creation, I made an explicit design in my character for my DJ persona to be androgynous, because it's, you know, in the goth community, androgyny is a big thing. So you can hide behind androgyny, you can, or not hide, but you can easily express androgyny without it being like weird. It's kind of implicitly accepted that that's a thing that's our community embraces. So, you know, I've been playing with, you know, using my androgyny on air to my advantage to produce comedy. And I'm finding now that I'm being allowed, quote unquote, by society to do things and be stupid in an absurdist way that I've always wanted to do, but I've never been given permission for, because the rest of the world views me in a certain way. And they're like, well, you have to be like this. Or if you do that, it's weird and it's creepy, or it's like, oh my God, did you hurt yourself? But now on air, you know, with my suits and my ties, and I'm playing with this, you know, thing, I can get away with these things. I'm getting the laughs that I never thought I would get.
Muted myself. Muted myself again. Sorry, I had a cough, so I muted myself. Do you think that you'd be able to take that character that's working in what I suspect is a small accepting crowd and take that and put that character on the street and have a similar effect with it?
I don't know. I guess that's going to be the test when coronavirus is over. I mean, I certainly can't go back to doing Madame Guillotine. There's no way I can do my cake routine. Like, I don't think I'll ever be able to do that again. It's just, I don't think so. I don't think people in society will want to share eating whipping cream with a stranger. You know, like, I think we've already had a year of creating new neural pathways in how we behave and how we interact with people, that I don't know if we're ever going to, if we do get back to a place where it's going to be okay to spit water at your audience, it's going to be a long time. And I don't have the luxury of waiting that out while everybody else gets back to work. So I am facing the reality of, I'm going to have to build a new show, at least for the first couple of years. And I have been toying with the idea of playing with this new kind of, you know, this character that I've created, you know, who's, you know, a confident idiot who's aware of the repercussions. You know, that's kind of the character for DJ Kate Mior is, you know, I'm incompetent, but I'm overconfident, you know, dumbass, but I'm aware that everybody's watching me and that kind of thing. So it's building into a thing.
That's the classic buffoon, is a full low status character, but really there's insight behind there. There's an intelligence working behind the buffoonery.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of like I mean, Coppelia definitely has that, the wind-up doll character has that flavor to her, where, you know, she's just kind of unaware of, you know, reality. So, you know, I just don't understand what social norms are. But like, and then, you know, Marie Antoinette is more of that white clown, you know, high status, aggressive character. And then, you know, building this new persona as a DJ, which I know in the DJ community, they probably like hate that, because they all think that we're being ourselves. It's like, no, you're a fucking character, you know it. And so consciously creating this character that is, you know, the overconfident idiot, but the overconfident idiot that faces consequences for their actions. That's kind of what I'm kind of playing with now, which is interesting. And also, like, talking now, it's just completely changed my whole, you know, self, you know, understanding. It's like, am I still a mime artist? Am I still a clown? Like, what am I now?
Well, you've definitely spent a year being a mouth jockey for doing the shows there, so maybe you could feed that back into doing the shows when you go out to do circles. Just to get chronology back a little bit.
Yeah.
I think the last time we touched off, you'd just gone back to Canada with the working Marie Antoinette show, and you were just beginning to shop it about.
Yeah.
Was that successful? Because it seems like it's quite a unique premise for a circle show. There wasn't a huge amount of creative circle shows around at one point. It was a lot of hype contract shows with nice pieces in them, but not very many character-driven pieces that worked as a piece of circle theatre, street theatre.
It was a little hard in Canada, but it was also well received because there weren't a lot of shows like that. And from like a, booker business standpoint, when, they couldn't afford to fly, the really big silent clown shows for overseas, I was definitely like, I found my niche because, it was like, oh, we can't afford to fly Pedro Tojas in, but, well, we got Kate here and she does a similar show. So it was like, it worked to my advantage and my disadvantage because as a result, I'm always going to be compared to those shows. And of course, I'm just never going to be as good as those shows because of a lot of, factors. So, it was, I found a niche with it. And yeah, I just kind of kept it. I think it was a good thing to have a show like that in Canada because it is unique. It also kind of works to my detriment because obviously, like when I'm working in countries like Dubai or Kuwait, I can't have a guillotine effect. And there certainly have been some festivals in Canada where they don't want to hire me because they think my show is too dark. So it can work against me on some level.
So in Dubai, I was just surprised by this. You can't have a guillotine effect.
No, I don't do the guillotine there.
Why?
They would definitely not have that there, because people still get beheaded on the streets in front of audiences for real. So
Of course,
yeah. So anytime I work in the Middle East, I'm doing the wind-up doll. Like I still do my roving acts. I still love doing them. But yeah, there's practical reasons for why I could never do Madame Guillotine. Also, just the character is too aggressive. For a female character, there's a lot of layers to my show that make it, I think, important. I would think, I personally think, make it an important show because I am, touching on very real social issues that we need to be talking about. But I also understand why it's not marketable in many places. But,
maybe part of the reason it's helpful to talk about these kind of things is because in some places they still fucking cut people's heads off.
You what? Sorry.
In some places they still cut people's fucking heads off.
Yeah. So not where they actually do it for real.
Yeah. Some of the other things I wanted to touch on, because we're reaching, I think, an hour and a half now, an hour and 36. You have a label, you have a fashion label, right?
Yep.
When did that become part of the weave of your life?
So I started making my own costumes when I started statuing, and that's how I taught myself how to sew. I was always really fascinated with corsetry because obviously corsetry is a huge staple in the goth culture and community. And when you're a young broke ass kid, you can't afford fancy shit, so you learn how to make it yourself. So I taught myself how to sew, and I would sew through the winter to be able to support myself when I couldn't do street in those first few years. I was, living on my own.
How did you support yourself through sewing?
Selling corsets on the internet. It was a very underground, very niche thing back then. The corsetry community existed on LiveJournal, which was a an online blogging thing. But it was such a thriving community that I was able to actually like supplement my income that way. And then I kind of always just liked doing it on off times. So I had a casual business for a long time. And then a couple of years ago, I opened my storefront because I wanted to have some kind of stability with my life. Because as much as I love touring, my partner and I have been together for a long time. And, it was really stressful on our relationship for me to be on the road so much. And especially when, he's on the road too, shooting, documentaries and stuff. It's like, are we ever gonna, so we both kind of made the decision that we would try and be home more. But obviously for me, being home more means I'm losing my income. So we thought, well, maybe if you open a store, we can build something here. And obviously the pandemic.
Well, before we get
great timing for that one. What?
When just before we hit the pandemic and the doom for most single business owners, when you opened the store, what was your feeling on it? What were you trying to do with it? What was your was it just necessity? Was it just filling an income-shaped hole in your life?
Oh, certainly not, because opening a store is an income drain. I really wanted to do something that really felt like I was making art, which I guess in retrospect now is kind of foolish, because if art's your business, you got to treat it like a business, and you can't just make what you feel like. You kind of actually have to have a plan. And I had, up until that point, subsisted off of doing trade shows, so trading at artisan events with wholesalers and that kind of stuff, and doing my custom. And I was like, well, that's a solid enough business model. I talked to a business person, and we did all the numbers, and they were like, yeah, you could make a viable business out of this. And then I realized it gave me a lot of identity crisis vibes, because I've always led first and foremost as being a busker. That's always been my identity. And then to be like, well, that's not actually what I'm doing full time now. Now I have I have this. So like, it got to the point where like, like it would be like getting published in Vogue and having a physical storefront felt like a footnote or like an afterthought. And it still kind of is now, because like, when I'm doing my thing on air with my DJ streams, I talk more about my history, my experiences being a street performer than I do about, oh yeah, that's right, you were published in Vogue like twice. Oh yeah, so you have a storefront that you're losing money on because of a pandemic now. Oh yeah.
So the store was successful then when it was first opened, right? It sounds like.
In terms of business people, it was successful in that it was not losing money. It was self-sustaining from the get-go. It never really made money because it's I have very strong ethical beliefs about clothing manufacturing and production. I refuse to work with sweatshops. I refuse to engage with fast fashion. I refuse to produce anything that I don't have the provenance for my materials. I refuse to engage in free labor or exploitation. So as a result, our society is not conditioned to value clothing and pay properly for garments. We don't understand the true cost of something. Even with our food, we don't understand the true cost of food. So it has been a very big uphill battle, and a lot of it generally has to do with, and I hate to say this, but it's absolutely true, it's social class, class mobility. I grew up in a low income environment. I grew up low income. I don't have access to rich people to buy my clothes. I don't even have access to like middle class people to buy my clothes. The access that I have are at these trade shows that predominantly target towards these middle class, white people that have the luxury of having ethics and the money to support their ethics, which makes it extraordinarily difficult because I don't look like them. I don't talk like them. I can't assimilate into that community. I don't give that community the desire to support me. So it has become very difficult, and like trying to maintain, a little bit of edge to the clothing I produce, and trying to maintain a really cool aesthetic, not just making, boring boxy, stuff, but like making flattering, beautifully cut garments. It pigeonholes me into specific, kind of aesthetics. And unfortunately, the people who follow into those aesthetics don't have the money to support. And it's frustrating because, we want to move away from this over-consumer, fast fashion, overproduction, wasteful, lifestyle. And the people, and I really do believe that people who are like me, who grew up lower income, who don't have access to lots of money, they want to buy quality because it is cheaper in the long. The problem is we just don't have the disposable income to do it. So I've definitely been going through a whole, what's happening with this business now?
Well, it sounds like you're passionate about it. There's no doubt that you poured some of your soul into this business. When it was running before the COVIDs came and, squashed everything, were you happy with it?
it was kind of like, I liken it to my early, when I had achieved that system when I was a statue, where I wasn't thinking about whether I was happy or not. I was just head down, hands to myself, buried in work to keep it going. It was not sustainable. And if I survive the pandemic as a business, I can't continue how I was doing.
Well, why
Something has
wouldn't
to.
you survive the pandemic? What's happened to the storefront? If you
No,
don't
we've been
mind.
closed. I've been closed through the well, we've had the longest lockdown, right? So it was 110 days I couldn't even go into the building. Um, and I mean, doing custom where you need to fit people, I chose people's safety and health over profit. So I have kept my doors closed, and only doing very select, specific things that I know are not harmful to me, staff, which I don't have anymore, unfortunately, or the person I'm working with. So that includes stuff like remote fittings, going back to a business model that I would have had before I opened the store, which which you need a lower overhead for. With the overhead that I have, this is not sustainable. It's not a long-term solution. So, to maintain the business at the level it was being maintained at before the pandemic, it was not sustainable. Like I would have had to streamline in some degree on some level, and focus my energy into one thing rather than trying to do, everything. Um,
You would have to
so
specialize.
yeah, so
So
it's hard.
do you think you'll carry on with it after the COVID's done? If the business ties up, will you still make corsets? Do you still want to be a sewer working with clothing in some way? Is that still a passion aside from the commercial element of it, or are you a bit burned by the whole thing?
I'm really burnt out. And it's funny because I was just doing an interview earlier today with my DJ partner on our production company and our events. And we were talking about that. And I'm like, dude, when this pandemic's over, I can't have fucking 3 jobs at this point. Like, something's gotta go. And, he was kind of like, is the store gonna go? And I'm like, I don't know. I will probably, I mean, I'm very fortunate that I've got some subsidy from our government to pay for my rent while this is all going on. So I don't necessarily have to worry about 90% of my rent is paid. I still have to worry about 10%, but for the most part, it's taken care of, because we were forced into lockdown, and at least our government is supporting small business finally now. So I'm not in any rush to make any decisions. So I have basically until June to make a decision, but I don't know if I can continue in the business model I was trying to achieve, because the practical reality is I never had enough money in the first place to do it properly, to really get something like that off the ground. I tried. I thought, I'd be able to eventually work my way up to getting to a point of, it wasn't going to happen because our society is stacked against people with, trying to move beyond their class. Our society punishes people who come from poverty, who want to do entrepreneurial things. We're not given the foundation. I never had the luxury of taking business classes because that's what all the rich kids fucking took. We just don't have the
I think we've still got Kate. I'm not sure though. Let's double check. So if it's just me, I suppose I'll fill the space while we see if we're going to get Kate actually moving on the screen again. I wanted to talk to Kate after about what she did post lockdown, and I'm quite gutted for her for what's happened as being a signal business owner. Who knows what would have happened without COVID, with that business being in vogue twice? It's quite an impressive thing to be able to claim. But during the lockdown, what Kate's done is quite incredible. Instead of sitting down on her laurels, instead of opening a beer, sparking a fag, and going, well, it's going to be a long 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, however long it may be. She got active. She went out there. She did things. She was productive. and she's formed a radio show now that gets a great many viewers weekly. I think every couple of days, every time I seem to speak to her to say hello, she's on her way to one show from another show from another show. And it just shows you that Kate is, I'm just going to double check while we're chatting. Kate is an incredible worker. She puts her mind to something and she achieves it. She's done it in fashion to have a storefront. That's an incredibly difficult thing to sustain. She did it with mime. She did it with. Okay, so Kate says that I froze. So I'm going to log back in and I'll be back in a couple of seconds. Hopefully it's me. Let's have a look.
Oh no, it's definitely Kate. It was you. You've got to restart. It was you. You have to restart. There we go. Incredibly impressive. It's an incredibly impressive thing to do in a time where we're despairing, you know. Hey, we've got you on now. We've got your screen link again. Can we get you back on your camera?
Yeah, I gotta get my camera back on. Sorry about that. I don't know if that was me or.
Sometimes this program's a little bit janky. There we go,
Okay.
and you're back. Excellent. So I was just discussing something which I thought would be quite a nice thing to finish off on, and something that people can actually go and digest you doing live now. What did you do when COVID broke out?
I drank for a couple weeks. Maybe a little bit more than a couple of weeks. And then I my DJ partner actually messaged me and said, "Hey, do you want to do a Darkness Forever online on Twitch?" And I was like, "What the fuck
Darkness
is Twitch?"
Forever?
That's our club night. So when I opened the store and I was in Toronto more, I started DJing as a hobby. And I started DJing at a night called Alter, which was really fun. And then Alter folded, and my DJ partner, Vernal Trash, and I, who we had known each other for a long time, since we were teenagers in the scene when we were kids. And, you know, we've always been friends. We always stayed friends throughout everything. And so when I started DJing, he actually sold me his old controller. And I literally thought it was just gonna be a fucking hobby. I was like, this is gonna be my one hobby that I'm just like doing for fun. Like when I DJ'd in Edinburgh a couple of years ago, that was like the year I learned how to DJ.
Wow.
I was just
So not
still
long
learning
ago.
how to use the equipment. Yeah. So we started a night called Darkness Forever together. And we found a great bar. And we, you know, he had run the event years prior and then buried it because he was kind of tired of running an event himself. And I said, well, I loved that event. Everybody in Toronto loved that event. It was a tongue-in-cheek goth night. It wasn't like pretentious. You played awesome music. Let's fucking just do Darkness Forever again. So I got him to resurrect it. And then we built it into its thing. And then we were doing these great things with it. And then COVID hit. And so he was like, do you want to do like a live stream? And I was like, all right, how do we do this? And then my partner, Matt, was like, hold my beer. And he figured out how to do everything. You know, we've worked together before. My partner is a visual effects person and a director. And with my background in film, we were working together to design the, you know, what I wanted for it, and, you know, the things that were important that we needed, the lighting we wanted to have for it, and all those things. And the show was crazy. Just the back end, getting it off the ground was insane because my DJ partner was, you know, in his house, socially isolating. We were here. We were trying to figure out how, and we were like doing crazy at the time. It was like crazy because nobody was doing this stuff. Like blending our tracks together when we signed off, because how we would run the night in real person is, you know, he would do an hour, I would do an hour, and then we'd switch off, and then we would DJ together at the end of the night, trading off tracks. And so we did Darkness Forever, and we had fun with it. And then I was like really fascinated with the platform of Twitch. Intellectually, I was like, this is a really cool platform. This is kind of like cable access TV if you want it to be. So I had said to my partner, I want to do a show, and I thought it was just gonna be a one-off. I was like, I want to do a show called Day Drunk, where I just get fucking drunk as shit and I spin whatever the fuck I want, and it'll be really, really funny. And then we did it, and then it turned out hilarious. We had the green screen going. Matt was, just, green screen jerking off with like, backgrounds. And I'm like, as a performer playing to it. And I'm like, oh, I'm on a roller coaster now. Woo. And so we were like, there's something here. There's potential for this here. And then it just kind of built the channel off of that. I've always been passionate about music. I had studied music, and I wanted to kind of have an outlet for my hobby in music to kind of exist. So then we started doing the listening parties where I'm teaching people about the history of instruments and the etymology of, goth music and that kind of stuff and where it comes from, and, pivotal seminal moments in music history. This Tuesday, we studied the band Suicide, and I talked about how they produced the entire album on a Wurlitzer fucking organ, and how that was like revolutionary in the context of, the music we listen to and that kind of stuff. And so we kind of built the channel predicated upon this concept of cable access TV, as opposed to I'm a DJ trying to do a club night. So really structuring it like a street show,
And do you think that's helped you through the lockdown, manage to cope? It certainly has,
definitely.
doing this with me.
Yeah. I mean, how has it been for you? Like, because this has grown for you. It started out as, I guess, a thing you kind of tried once or twice, and now suddenly you're episode 95.
Yeah, well, when I first started doing it, I didn't really have an idea of what it was. And it was kind of just talking as if we're in a bar, and I'd get drunk constantly, and I had bottles of wine gathered up behind me. Now it's a structured living history interview that goes into an archive, and it's really found its sense of place, And as I say moments ago, it's kept me really sane through all of this. I lost my major outlet to engage the world, to understand, to learn to an extent. If I was having an emotional problem, I'd go and do shows, and I'd try and work that into jokes and into bits of material. And it would be a way of me slowly understanding what was going on. That was gone, So having some stimulation and talking to amazing people like yourself has really kept me alive, happy, productive. And I think I'm going to come out of lockdown more knowledgeable and more capable than when I came into it, which is
that's awesome to hear. That's awesome because I know we were both kind of struggling for a while. I remember talking to you when we were both kind of struggling and just being like, "Oh my God, I have no identity anymore. What the fuck is going on?"
Who am I?
Yeah. It's definitely, like, for me, this is kind of turned into this really bizarre, strange, like this last year has been a fucking trip. Like, I've always loved music. I've always, been super enthusiastic and a big fan, and especially of new bands, and a big supporter of new music. And like, now I'm fucking shooting the shit with my favorite bands, and they respect me as for my contribution to the industry. I'm working with people that have been DJing for 25 fucking years who think I've been DJing for as long as them, and it's like really weird.
A lot of them don't have that. You've had a career in performance, and DJing is a performance. You're performing to the crowd. You're giving a sense of theme to all the songs you're playing.
Yep. I think a lot of them haven't really thought about that because, like, I actually hosted a workshop for DJs a couple weeks ago because, a lot of like, when you're a DJ, you're in the booth. You're not, you're not the center. You're not the main course. Everybody's you're providing the environment for people to dance, but you're not supposed to be the main attraction. Now, I personally always love the idea of being a hype DJ, which is very, very diametrically opposing to our community, where, goths they're not really, that's not their thing, but like, I mean, and that's why, like, my DJ partner, Vernal Trash, and I work so well together, because we're both fucking idiots. Like, you know, we love fucking with the audience, playing stupid music on occasion and like trolling them. And I used to back before the pandemic, when I was DJing real bars, I was like the hype DJ who was just like, yeah, fuck you, yeah, you know, mirror, 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 you know, that kind of stupid shit. Just for you know, shits and giggles, because I never ever took myself so seriously. And so a lot of these DJs who come from this background of like, I am serious about goth music and I'm serious about what I do, they were sitting ducks for hecklers. And a lot of people started getting like really upset about, and like, you know, they didn't know how to handle it. So I'm like, oh, hold my beer, I got this. Hey guys, do you want to do a fucking workshop on how to deal with hecklers? And, you know, everybody was like, wait, what? That's a skill? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally, like, this is what I've been doing for like 20 years. What do you guys want? And, you know, having that conversation with them about like, you're a character, and just watching them just kind of go, well, I am. It's such a different timbre to performance. It's such a different kind of performance. And I guess it's kind of the thing where I'm like, this is new and interesting, and I kind of want to crack this. So when
once again, you're weaving past skills into new skills, which has seemed to be a theme throughout your career, of taking this thing I'm working on now, weaving it into the next thing, take this skill here, weave that into this, and have multiple layers of skilled work, creating costumes, working on mime, having the idea of production as storytelling. Kate, I could talk to you all night long, I really could. But if I do longer than 2 hours with you, everyone else is going to complain and say, why don't they get longer than 2 hours? You know how this works. So I'll give you some closing questions. Any young people who want to go and do street, do you have any advice for
them? Just do it. Don't fucking think, just fucking do it.
Solid advice. Short, sweet, and solid. And the last thing, there's probably going to be a fair amount of people watching this over the following weeks who you've spent time with and who you've known and enjoyed experiences with. Is there any message you'd like to put out to all of them?
Oh, I miss everybody. I miss everybody. I miss all of you. One of the things that I really miss the most is backstage hangouts. I miss being able, like, I posted this to Facebook the other day. I had a dream. I was rolling through London, and I you know, rocked up to Covent Garden and saw everybody, and you were there, and, you know, like Matt Ricardo was there, like everybody that I've worked with over the years that you know, I know lived there. I think at some point my friend Davide Gabbiano from the Beat Brothers was there randomly. Like all of these people that I, you know and I've talked to and hung out with. Dave Southern was there in my dream, and like it was just like this really rich dream. And I just remember we all hugged, we all hung out. I think Tommy Everson was there. Like everybody was there in the dream. Like Dynamite was there. It was like everybody was there, and then we all did a group show. Because
what a lovely cathartic dream. You got to see all your friends, you got to hug, hang out, and do a really big nice show together.
Right. I kind of just would love, I can't wait to see everybody again. I miss everybody. I miss everybody. I hope everybody is like, you know, weathering this. And I guess another thing is, you know, if you're having a hard time, like reach out, you know, because, you know, we've all been there. We're all going through the ebb and flow of it. You know, there's some days where I'm like, I'm totally fine. And then other days where I'm like, I want to die. And it's, you know, I hope we make it through, you know, the situation all together. Because I've already lost people last year from COVID. I don't want to lose any more people. So.
Yeah, I get it. And hopefully soon we'll all be together, back on the pitch, hugging and smiling and doing big shows.
Hopefully, and then bitching about the rain.
You know it. And then bitching about each other once the thrill's worn off.
And then bitching about money.
Yes. So everyone's been watching. Guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing your time with us in the archive. Last thing to say, if you did enjoy it, say this at the start, say it one more time. Please join us, Whining On with Public Performers on Facebook, the Encourage Broke fan page, Whining On YouTube. Click subscribe. And if you can, and if you're able to, please think about joining the Patreon and support the project. Everybody, it's been absolutely wonderful to spend time with you, Kate. Really pleasure to speak, and I so look forward to we can hang out again. Everyone else, Been good, guys. Catch you soon. Bye, everybody. Bye.